We grow when we give.
We grow when we give.
We grow when we give.
Nosotros crecemos cuando damos.
We grow when we give.
与えるとき成長する。
We grow when we give.
Welcome to R.O.G, Return on Generosity, a podcast celebrating generosity at work. Not financial giving, giving valuable time, alternative perspectives, and genuine collaboration. R.O.G listeners to episode 99. As you know, these odd number episodes we are recording on YouTube, so we have an opportunity to connect with you personally, get your thoughts, feedback, responses, and also recommendations on topics to cover or other leaders to interview on R.O.G. So please use YouTube as a way to stay connected. Today we're talking about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, because it's so critical to how to be a generous leader, and that's emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is something that we can develop over time with intentional focus and energy. So for those who are practicing leadership every day, this is good news because they're really important skills and things that we can do something about over time. So years ago, a thought leader by the name of Daniel Goleman wrote a book called Emotional Intelligence. And since then, he's written Working with Emotional Intelligence, Primal Leadership, Destructive Emotions, Social Intelligence, and on and on. And he's also written Harvard Business Review articles and a lot of thought leadership on this topic, which I appreciate. One of the things that really stood out for me is that he said that emotional intelligence, sometimes referred to as EQ, is twice as important as your IQ, your intelligence and intellect, and your technical competence combined. So for those of us who otherwise had thought that the main value that we're contributing is our smarts or our experience, think again. So emotional intelligence is that X factor, in my opinion, in great, outstanding, generous leadership. So what is it? Well, the first place to start is self-awareness. A Hay Group study was done years ago that identified that less than 9% of people are self-aware. So if you're like, whew, at least I'm in the minority, maybe you are. Or if you're humbly considering, perhaps I'm in the majority of those who think they're self-aware but aren't. So how can we improve our self-awareness? Well, one thing that we could do is ask for feedback. Think of one or two people in your life who you really trust. You respect their opinion, and you know that they'll be honest, candid, thoughtful, and kind when giving you feedback, meaning it will be behaviorally specific, something actionable, not judgmental, and a way for you to see how you're interpreted by or the perception that others have of you. So that's one way to do it. Another is to be self-reflective and start a journal. You can call it like an energy journal or just a journal. And you can start to think about your moodogram, so to speak, like your highs and your lows. What are those things that are going on, or the times during the day that you felt most energized? You felt creative, engaged. You were really connected. You were almost insatiable about the topic. And then what were the times during the day that you felt bored, disconnected, kind of frustrated, irritated maybe? You know, what was going on? Who was there? What was the topic? What was the other context? So by journaling and recognizing your emotions and even putting language to those feelings, you're going to start to become more self-aware. You might even recognize some patterns of behavior or ways that you're feeling around the time of the day, the temperature, the weather, the who else is involved. Just look for patterns and become more self-aware. Then there is self-management. And the key thing here is the gap between stimulus and response. Because sometimes we think that this thing made me feel this way, or it made me do this thing. But as we develop our self-management, we create a gap between that stimulus and response. And in that gap, that pause, if you will, we get to choose how we're going to respond, if we're going to respond at all. And in that gap and in that pause, we can be mindful of what reaction would best embody or emulate my values. How could I respond in a way that is most congruent with how I see myself at my best, right? What response would be the most appropriate and values congruent response for me? So I separate out that stimulus and I consider how I want to respond. That's self-management, the ability to count to 10 or breathe it out or sleep on it. William Ury refers to it as going to the balcony, where you come out of the situation and you look at it from a different perspective. So whatever it is that you're doing to create that pause or that gap, that is self-management. Then there's social awareness. And social awareness is how well you read the room, right? It's almost like there's a tempo going on and you pick up on it and you respond and adapt accordingly, right? You watch for body language. You think about what's not being said. You notice where people are sitting or what topic we're talking about. You're recognizing the emotional intelligence in the room. You're people watching and you're listening really intently, not just to what's being said, but what's going on. And you're responding to that. So let's just say you have a big idea about some promotions that you want to initiate or a new innovation that you want to invest in. And the topic of conversation is around budget cuts and the recession. Well, it doesn't mean that you should never talk about your promotional ideas and your innovations. It just means that this meeting may not be the time to bring it up and that you have the patience and the wherewithal to wait until a more appropriate time. That's social awareness, talking about things that are appropriate and timely, and you're being thoughtful and empathetic in how you're initiating or contributing to conversations. And then the last piece of emotional intelligence is relationship management. And this is squarely in the lane of generous leadership. This is all around being curious and open, giving and receiving feedback, being consistent, building trust, being open to people asking you questions, and then vulnerably and transparently answering those questions and having those conversations. It's about showing people that you care and that you're investing in them, and that the reason that you're reaching out to them is not transactional, but because you really want to connect, invest, and build on your relationship. You don't ever make people feel like objects. You make them feel like they belong and that they matter and you care about them. You have tough conversations, and when you mess something up, which of course you will because you're human, you own it, you apologize, and you fix it. Those are components of relationship management. So for our takeaway tip, how to apply what we've learned to our own work and lives, I recommend that we start with self-awareness because that's the starting place. And for most of us, we've got work to do there. So think of one or two people in your work life or in your personal life who would be willing to give you helpful, constructive feedback so that you could improve in your self-awareness, and maybe start a journal to jot down some of the emotions that you're feeling and the reasons why you think you're feeling that way. Please join me next week for episode 100 of R.O.G. with Dolly Chugg. Dolly is the author of The Person You Mean to Be. She's an NYU professor and a social psychologist, and she's coming out with, this month to be released, is this book called A More Just Future. It's an incredible interview. She's a phenomenal thought leader and human being. So please join me, episode 100 with Dolly Chugg. Until then, stay generous, everyone.